On any given dry season day, the sunrise over the verdant Bududa hills is an idyllic, breathtaking scenery. The full tourism potential that these standalone volcanic hills and V-shaped valleys, which form part of the Mount Elgon in the Bugisu sub-region, offer is yet to be explored. Agriculture is the main source of livelihood, with majority of the small-scale holder farmers growing food crops, according to the Uganda Bureau of Statistics. Torrential rains, which are hard to predict these days, accompanied by gusty winds, are the underbelly of this area at the border with Kenya. There have been numerous episodes of landslides and mudslides that have wrecked lives and property. Between 2008 and 2018, the government reported at least 400 landslides and mudslides. The frequency increased since 2019. 75-year-old Calist Chibalizi has spent his entire life on these hills in Bunamulembwa village in Bumulakwani parish, Bulucheke sub-county in Bududa district. His mud and wattle house stands on the side of the hill surrounded by a lush banana plantation. An open-air fireplace comprising 3 stones and lots of ash stands on one side of the house. Here, Chibalizi is trying to coax a meal. He had seen it all over the years, heavy downpours, thundering sludge, but nothing like what happened in March 2010 when an amorphous landslide powered downhill by violent storm water buried 350 people, the country's worst natural calamity. The incident awakened residents, the government, donors and NGOs about the climate-induced risks that linger here and paved way for a catalogue of interventions to boost resilience and adaptation. Chibalizi vividly recalls the flurry of activities around his village as a coterie of officials from the district, the central government and NGOs flooded the area for sensitization meetings.
We planted the trees, but many withered. During the many trainings, we told officials that it is better to plant starting April, but they insisted on us planting in October when the rains are intense.
Neither Chibalizi nor other residents NTV talked to know the tree planting project as the territorial approach to climate change, or TAC. All they recall is being told to plant trees.
For us, we recall being told to plant trees. The officials checked on us for a while to monitor progress, but this stopped. We know trees are useful, but in these hills, it is the only source of firewood.
But after planting the trees and after some months down the road, we stopped seeing the officials. So we also went back to our business.
It's true we received training on how to plant trees and how to look after them. But when the officials stopped coming back here, everyone moved on with their lives.
Bunamulembwa is among the villages that was chosen for implementation of the TAC, one of the pilot programs of the National Adaptation Programs of Action, or NAPA projects, financed through several donor agencies with government counterpart funding. Uganda developed its first NAPAs as a key resolution of the United Nations Climate Change Conference, or COP7, to enhance responses and communication on climate adaptation needs owing to population growth and related challenges. The projects were submitted to the Least Developed Country Fund, or LDCF, in the same year, and the country started accessing climate cash in 2012. Other NAPA projects were piloted in the districts of Palisa, Bundibujo and Nakasongola. The TAC project cost about $1 million. It was pooled by the United Nations Development Program, or UNDP, which gave $300,000. $450,000 was given by the Department for International Development, or DFID, and $250,000 by the Danish International Development Agency, or DANIDA. Smaller amounts were also contributed, $100,000 co-pooled by the UNDP and the Global Environment Facility, or GEF, $225,000 from the Waterloo Foundation, and $330,000 from the Welsh Assembly government. In Bududa, with a population of 173 people, according to UBOS, TAC was implemented in 4 sub-counties, which are Bulucheke, Bushika, Bubita and Bukalasi. 14 years later, except for a nursery bed, there is hardly a trace of the TAC project on the ground.
Uganda was one of the countries that prepared, and we came up with some projects, about 6 projects. And one of them, as you have rightly stated, is the territorial approach for mitigation of climate change actions or impacts. This project was implemented around the Elgon landscape, Mount Elgon landscape, and a number of lessons were learned, not only from this particular project, but across the board. Because this was the first time Uganda was diving into the waters of coming up with climate change action plans, a national one. So some 6 projects were developed, and that one is one of them. And I can assure you there were lessons to be learned, of course. Of course, being the first time, we didn't do it as well.
What we've learned so far, that when you have money moving directly to the communities, from government to communities, or from the donor to communities, okay, you are likely to have a bigger impact of that money. You will see more results.
Overall, there is need for us to move away from short-term interventions into, say, a minimum of 5-year interventions, so that there is something that the interventions on the ground are able to create an impact that is sustainable, but also building on it.
On the day we visited the area, we found some residents cutting trees willy-nilly, oblivious to their purpose to the ecosystem. Several residents echoed similar concerns of not having fully understood the purpose of the project. Some, despite being taken through several trainings, were mistrustful of the intentions of the project, interpreted as meant to grab their land. Others claimed they were given tree saplings of bad quality, which withered fast. For long spells, issues have been raised about the mismatch of donor-funded products not being tailored with the needs of the local people. There is increasingly calls to donors to change, particularly the projectization of projects when it comes to financing climate adaptation initiatives. Uganda is party to the Global Climate Change Response Mechanisms through the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or UNFCCC, which is the main international agreement on climate change that was reached in 1992. The 194 countries signatory to the UNFCCC agreed in 2001 to establish the Least Development Country Fund, or LDCF, to mobilize climate funds to support developing countries' efforts to cope with climate change effects. The LDCF is overseen by the Global Environment Facility, or GEF Trust Fund, which was established in 1992, now in its 9th cycle, which ran from 2022 until 2026, with some $5.3 billion, which is about 20 trillion Uganda shillings, available for countries to undertake projects to fight effects of climate change. There is, however, no proper record of how much Uganda has raked in climate change financing, since the money is funneled or sometimes pulled from the different development agencies. Anthony Wolimbwa, the national coordinator from the Climate Change Action Network Uganda, told NTV that a lot of money has been trickling in.
I think as of last year, the Climate Finance Unit reported Uganda received up to about $400 million, about there. This year, the projection is it's going to go down a bit, about $300 or $350 million. And this money is both on budget, off budget. On budget comes to government of Uganda. Off budget comes via non-budget sources, the one which goes to NGOs.
However, the money is not reflected on the ground.
Maybe out of like every $10 that you receive as a country, you will find maybe about $3-4 may reach down the ground. The other bigger percentage is consumed into what's called transaction costs. Either they are the mini costs to the agencies involved, which sometimes take off mandatory percentages. Then there's money sometimes which remains either for capacity building or technical assistance, as they call it. It remains and does those things.
The Commissioner for Climate Change in the Ministry of Water and Environment, Margaret Athieno Mwebesa, admitted that there were major challenges encountered in implementing TAC and other NAPA projects.
But the good news is that now government of Uganda is an implementing agency, and we are also a direct access entity. Ministry of Water and Environment is a direct access entity to climate financing, that is the Green Climate Fund, the Global Environment Facility, and then the Adaptation Fund. This means that we can request for funding. If we come up with good bankable projects, it goes through, of course, a very rigorous review process. We can access this funding directly.
Athieno said several lessons were learnt and are being integrated in newer projects.
If you have an environmental problem, it is not only about cutting trees. You can go into a forest, it is not only about cutting trees. It is about the entire ecosystem. Within the forest we have trees, we have the vegetation around, we have the soil, we have the animals, we have the water, at times we have wetlands. So we need to have an integrated landscape approach.
Emmanuel Etonu, the Elgon Region Coordinator of Integrated Seed and Sector Development, or ISSD, Uganda, explained where the problem lies.
Issues around climate change and natural resource conservation are long-term, requires long-term interventions. That there should be a commitment to keep channeling efforts towards a specific target or addressing a specific problem. And I think this is where we have a gap, because we tend to respond to disasters as they happen, but we need a long-term plan that is consistently followed through with the aim of ensuring that we have an impact on the ground.
He said understanding community needs is key if climate adaptation projects are to work.
If you engage the farmers, if you engage the local leadership to participate in this process and they own it up, then it becomes very easy for us to be able to cause a change that we need to see.
For instance, while the TAC project failed in Bududa, in neighboring Bale, the district environment officer Charles Wekube said it registered modest success.
So maybe with other districts, because of these challenges, they have decided to keep off. But for us in Bale, we took it as a district project, and we always manage to reach out to our coordinators when we have some projects like meetings in other programs. We make sure we call our coordinators so that in case there is this program has an allowance, transport refund, a coordinator also benefits from there.
There are very many projects that have come up since then. As I told you, that was a learning process. We first dive in, and a lot of lessons were learned. And government has since also improved in the way it designs. But also, we are part of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. We are party to that. We are also party to the Paris Agreement. So we are guided.
If you see now the templates, the proposal templates, we first of all ensure that your project has a national ownership, that it exhibits a lot of accountability, it exhibits ownership, there's transparency, that there is some science, because your activities, there must be evidence to push for external activity. You just don't bring an activity, say we're going to plant trees when there's no scientific basis for it. So now the lessons that were picked have now been translated into these new funds.
One expert who requested anonymity to speak freely as they consult with several agencies on climate change mitigation projects acknowledged that while development partners are pouring in a lot of money in climate change mitigation projects, a lot of it is spent on mundane aspects like flying in experts, conferences in hotels, writing reports on a host of related issues, which weighs down the intended purpose of the projects.
If we cannot relate climate change to these different aspects, then people will not appreciate and really fund climate change actions. Now, the Climate Change Act, as you rightly said, was enacted in 2022, January. That is when it came into force. That Climate Change Act entails and mandates each lead agency to come up with climate change action plans. And if we talk of lead agencies, the entire government, all those agencies, including our cities now, local governments, we should all come up with climate change action plans. And it also mandates the minister responsible for finance, together with our minister responsible for climate change, to ensure there is sufficient funding for those action plans.
Capacity within government to enforce that criteria at the time of implementation, to make sure that you are reporting correctly, to make sure that the communities are benefiting. Now that is one bit which is still a challenge from the government side, and also on our side as observers. Sometimes we need to make sure that these projects come in and they do what they are supposed to do.
To navigate this complicated terrain of donor financing, the government needs to scale up its own capitalization of the National Climate Financing Mechanism through, among other things, contributing directly through the budget or as subvention from the budget to the dedicated climate fund within the budget, something that Next Door Kenya is doing, and continuing to compete through proposal development and submission to global funds.